What do you do with an underperforming employee? Kevin Way, your reaction business coach. And this is probably one of the most difficult things that a business owner does, is dealing with underperforming employees. You see, this right now is dealing with the core issue of why so many business owners ultimately fail, because they're not willing to confront and deal with underperforming employees. I can tell you right now a story where many years ago I was coaching a client who had two underperforming salespeople who were getting paid a base salary and were producing nothing. And I could see the finances draining away in his business, and our coaching was helping him deal with these employees. And it took about 6-7 months, and they came into one of his coaching sessions as I'm closing the doors of my business. And I said, why didn't you deal with these gentlemen 6 months ago like we talked about? And he says, I just didn't have the courage to do it. And there's a lot of business owners who struggle with that courage of dealing with underperforming employees. Now, let's go ahead and assume that we've already hired these employees, they're already on board. The fastest way to avoid underperforming employees is to never hire one. Now, how do we avoid this? Part of it is you don't want to hire a toxic employee. I've recently done a video that talks about how to avoid arrogant and incompetent people, what I call the arrogance and competence matrix. And so let's get into this right now. So first of all, is the first question we need to ask ourselves is, does this employee even know they're underperforming? I can tell you how many times that I have talked to employees and the owner and I know they're underperforming, but when I ask the employee, how do you think you're doing? Their response is, yeah, I think I'm doing great. It's like, what? Yeah, they have no clue they're underperforming. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find a way and help these underperforming employees realize that they are underperforming. Too many business owners make assumptions that aren't true. They're assuming correctly that the employee is underperforming. The employee doesn't know that. So we have to find a way to come to that realization with the employee. So that leads us to number 2, is you need to find a way to measure their performance and how that lines up with the standard. Now, let's say, for example, that there is an on-time standard in your business that no more than 2 absences in a 6-month period will get a formal write-up. And let's say this employee comes in and they're chronically late, 6, 7, 8 times a month. So we have to actually start measuring that to the standard that you've already established. You may have established that standard in your business. And if you haven't established that standard, maybe you should. But if you do have the standard established and that employee just keeps violating the standards, that needs to be brought in. It needs to be put in front of them to see that this is the standard, you're not meeting that. Whether that be on time, whether that be a sales standard, whether that be a quality control standard, what does that look like? How are we measuring it? And are they aware that they are not meeting the standard? Now, the third thing we need to do is then we need to have an informal session. And I emphasize informal. Now, I know a lot of HR people are going to want to go straight into the documentation phase. And I'm sorry, but Cat Bert doesn't get to control your business. You get to control your business as the business owner. So let's have an informal session with this individual. How do we have an informal session? First thing we need to do is sit them down. We need to say, hey, this is the kind of positive value that you bring to the business. Let's build them up at least at the start. The second thing is, what are they doing wrong? Let's identify the issue. What needs to be improved? The third thing is, how do they plan on improving that? You don't tell them how they're improving. They need to tell you. Too many times I've seen where business owners tell them what to do, boom, boom, boom. The employee has no input, therefore they have no buy-in to the solution. So you have to basically get the employee to tell you what they need to do to get better. Then once they tell you and you approve of that, now give them encouragement. Hey, I know you can do better. I think you put a great plan together. Let's make that happen. Now, the fourth thing is, let's go assume we've had this informal session and the employee still is not implementing their plan. They still haven't improved their key performance indicators. Okay, now we go into what we call the formal corrective action, or what I like to call it the CTJ, come to Jesus meeting. This is now where you document things. This is where you go ahead and lay it on the line. Here's the standard. Here's what you're at. This is what the underperformance is. What is your corrective plan? And then by when are we going to have this back on track? And therefore, what are the consequences if you do not do that? Has to be laid out in that terminology. Now, when we take a look at this level, we have to ask ourselves then, Is this issue? Is it a training issue? Have they not been trained properly? A lot of employees, when they come into a business, they were just thrown up against the wall in what we would be called OJT, on the job training, figure it out as you go along. And it's a good possibility that a lot of these employees never got any sort of real training. So you need to consider what additional training they need to have, whether that be internal training by either yourself or one of your team members. Maybe it's external training. You go and send them to some sort of training process, a seminar, a workshop, a skills improvement process. That can be an outside vendor who does that for you, okay? And then if you do the training and it's still not working out, then we need to look at transferring them to another department. Maybe they just don't fit in that job. I'll give you a good example. I had a client one time, and they had both a upfront sales, and a back-end function of production. And one of the things that we found is they had a production person who was was very social, very talkative, and wasn't getting their job done. And one of the things we realized is, wait a minute, what if we put them up front at the counter to work with customers coming in? And, at first I was like, well, they don't know anything about how to work the front counter. Well, why not train them? So they put them on the front counter. That person lit up like a Christmas tree, loved it. They had huge amounts of sales. Average dollar sale went up. Everything was positive. Why? We transferred that person out of production, put them up on that sales counter, and it was amazing, and realized, hey, we just needed to transfer that person. Now, if we train the person and it doesn't work, and then we transfer that person and it doesn't work, now we have to come to the point of termination. And nobody wants to terminate an employee unless you have to. And now we have to make it as professional as possible. We have to sit down with the employee. We need to inform them that all the effort that was put in, this isn't going to work. We thank you for your service. And in essence, what you're telling them is you're going to help them be a success somewhere else. And I know that's hard. And I know that's difficult, but in the end, it probably will benefit that employee because they get to find a business where they will potentially succeed far better than at yours. In an ideal world, we're going to have a super high retention rate. I'm going to talk about that in future videos, so pay attention. Subscribe to my channel because you're going to get videos like this all the time. They're going to help you be a better employee. And we're going to talk about how to retain great employees and why it's so important. I had a client one time, and I asked him one time, I said, what have you learned about business? And he goes, hire slow, fire fast. And obviously these 7 steps I just talked about can be fairly quick, especially if it's somebody that you know is just not going to work out. So you have to have the courage to pull the trigger, make it happen. So let's go ahead and have the courage of your convictions to do what you know is right with that employee. With that, go out there, make it a great day, treat your employees well, and if you have to make hard decisions, make hard decisions.